Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, good morning. Firstly, I would like to thank you all for being here today and for all the support and the effort and the time that you have given us in the past month and a half in trying to prepare for this very interesting and unique gathering where we hope we can inspire the competitiveness dialogue in Egypt, inspire the private sector and our government to focus more on the real attributes that can make this economy flourish in the future. Competitiveness is a key pillar for economic development and growth in Egypt, and we would like to share the experiences of our international partners on a wide range of rankings, from the #1 country in the world all the way down to countries that are trying to really make an improvement in their overall macro and microeconomic environment for them to be more competitive. Egypt ranks 115 on the Global Competitiveness Index, and we believe that if we put our efforts together, that we can make significant change in that ranking, bringing it down to at least 99 within the next 2 years. Now that is easier said than done, and we need to really focus on the things, the pillars, that will really make these significant changes. Pillars such as the macroeconomic environment, pillars such as the financial development, pillars such as innovation, business sophistication, technology readiness. All of these Egypt underperforms on. So our expectation is for the private sector, international partners, and the government put their hands together for us to be able to move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, before I start, I'd like to, all the ladies here, say Happy Mother's Day to my mother and all of you. Happy Mother's Day to all of you. And if I may please ask you to rise for the national anthem of Egypt. Thank you. Mr. Ibrahim, who is the managing CEO and managing director of the National Bank of Egypt in the United Kingdom, thank you very much for flying all the way here to be with us, to join us. If I may please ask you to join me on the panel. Yasser is not only a dear friend, but one of the fantastic thinkers in the Egyptian financial markets. Recently moved to London to head the National Bank of Egypt in the UK. Thank you for being here, Yasser. Thank you. Yasser, good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Our topic, as we agreed, is global competitiveness. That's the main theme. And I'm very happy to have you here with us today because we want to start by talking about the Egyptian banking sector, the Egyptian financial sector. On the financial development pillar, we rank 111, I believe. And I think there's significant improvements that can be made in that direction. Firstly, I'd like to talk about the National Bank of Egypt in the UK because obviously that shows an expansion vision for the Egyptian banking sector outside of Egypt and for them to become more competitive in the global economy. So please talk to me about the National Bank of Egypt in the UK. What is it? What's the vision? What's the structure? Very briefly so we can move on to the more technical issues.
Sure. Well, yeah, again, thank you very much, and thanks for giving me that opportunity. The National Bank of Egypt actually was established already back in 1982. It consisted of 2 branches in the United Kingdom. And in 1992, it was transformed into the subsidiary, which it is until today. It is the only subsidiary of the National Bank of Egypt anywhere in the world. There are 2 more branches in New York and in Shanghai. And really what we are a niche player. Of course, our home market is Egypt, so 43% of our balance sheet is related to business with Egyptian entities. And we are very much involved in also the imports of a lot of the strategic goods for the country, including oil and other commodities. Now, the bank is very well established. It is profitable. We have a lot of talent in the bank. And the way forward for us is to diversify a bit our business activities. Because again, you know, as our business is very much Egypt related, to a certain extent, the bank has been in its comfort zone, you know, like business is coming by definition and so on. But there are many, many more things that you can do with this entity. Because as I said, it is profitable already. It is very well structured. We don't have problem loans. We don't have any exposures that are causing me a headache on the day-to-day basis. So it really allows you to develop the business. And I believe that Egypt has a story to tell, and maybe we can be used as one of the vehicles to transmit that story. As you know, London also is a very active place. You have a lot of delegations coming. We have basically on a weekly basis government, either ministries or other government institutions coming. In early May there will be a major trade delegation, and something that we are doing, for example, as well now is that we will sponsor such events, because I believe it's not only important to do the things right, but also to show people that you are there and to leave your mark.
Yesterday, let me just go out of the box in the thinking here. Are you just there to support the Egyptian private sector and the interaction between the business, Egyptian businessmen and British businessmen, or are you thinking retail? Are you thinking of, you know, expanding and really being a service provider to the, you know, British population?
Yes, I'm looking actually at many things. So far, the bank is really, as I said, very much Egypt related. Our clients are 90% somehow related to Egypt. We hold a lot of accounts for Egyptian corporates. We have a full banking license in the UK. We also hold private retail accounts and so on. So basically, we can do anything that modern banking offers. However, the concentration of activities has been quite significant. And yes, we want to expand those activities. And I do see a lot of opportunities. For example, you know, when you talk to some of the people, like the Egyptian ambassador and some other officials, they tell you that they have been repeatedly asked by Egyptians in London how to contribute to Tahya Masr and other funds. And that seems to have been not done through National Bank of Egypt so far. So I believe these are our natural activities. We are a niche player. Even the regulator understands that it is normal that we have a big Egyptian exposure, but again, we have to cater for all kinds of needs, and I think that such issues are also important. And these services, I don't want to make money out of them, because if it's good for the country, I mean, why should somebody go to one of the big local British banks to make a transfer for a charity fund in Egypt, you know? And there are different ones, from hospitals, as you know, to Tahya Masr and others. And this is just one of the services that we can provide. But we can do much, much more, of course.
Let me ask you this. You know, you're one of the very few Egyptian banks that have moved cross borders, in a sense, despite the fact that we have a lot of Egyptian local banks and a lot of multinationals and international banks that work in Egypt, including Lebanese banks. We see a lot of them as well. What has been hindering, or what you refer to as the comfort zone, and I call it the regulatory comfort zone, because that's the only way they're going to be comfortable here. It's maybe regulation that makes them comfortable. What is hindering the expansion of the Egyptian banking sector outside of Egypt? taking advantage of places like Australia, where there's a lot of Egyptians expanding into the Gulf as well. I mean, why isn't our banking sector really moving out across borders like a lot of the international players we see in the market?
Well, first of all, as you know, the banking reform in Egypt started in 2003, 2004, when the then governor, Dr. Farwell Oda, started to restructure the whole Egyptian banking sector. So that's approximately 13 years ago, you can say. So it's quite a short period, maybe, ever since the banks have been restructured, properly capitalized, showing proper business plans. What you see today from the regulator side is you have a tough regulator who understands this job. And again, that was only possible because there were all of a sudden people who understand how international banking works and how international supervision of banks works as well. All of a sudden in 2004, 2005, also through the help of some of the international other countries, you were able to pay salaries and packages and a career that was attracting Egyptians who used to live outside Egypt for a long, long time, for multinationals, who all of a sudden said, I would like to be part of this reinvention of Egyptian banking, of this new phase of the industry. And they came back, and many of them are still here and hold very senior positions. In general, it is always difficult for banks to establish themselves in a foreign market. If you take the National Bank of Egypt in the UK, of course we are a niche player. I will never be Barclays Bank or NatWest or one of the other big British banks. But again, we don't want to be that. We want to cater for our clients, and we have a lot of talent and a lot of knowledge that other banks miss, because simply this is our home market, so naturally you would think that we have a better understanding of Egypt and maybe of the region. And I think that there are opportunities for other Egyptian banks, but you have to have the right business model. You know, I wouldn't be able to compete maybe in retail banking in the UK because I don't have the branch network others have. I don't have the headcount others have. But there are a lot of business opportunities, and also clients understand that when dealing with a bank like National Bank of Egypt, you can hire and buy in a lot of regional knowledge.
If competing with the European banking sector or the international banking sector might be a little bit difficult at our maturity stage at this point, but how about Africa? There's a lot of opportunities in Africa. Why aren't we seeing, I mean, most of the, or one of the major issues that Egypt faces with Africa in terms, or at least the private sector in terms of private sector interaction, is the banking transactions. There's a hindering within that, whether it's trade finance or whether it's just normal transactions. So why aren't we focusing on expansion in Africa, where we could be, have a little bit more competitiveness over?
Well, personally, I fully agree. The African continent offers a lot of opportunities. And the National Bank of Egypt, also together with other banks, has interests in Sudan and in Ethiopia. We have representative offices. We have a share in a local bank there. Some other Egyptian banks, including National Bank, are active in Uganda. So there are some starts to penetrate the African market. Now, when you look at Africa as a continent, I fully agree, tons of opportunities, very good margins as well. I mean, when you go to Africa, because of the lack of alternatives sometimes, transactions can be extremely profitable and attractive. However, the name of the game ever since, especially 2008, again, the financial crisis, nowadays is de-risking. And you see that also with international banks. And at my previous employer, which was a German bank, also after quite a 5 to 10 years of expansion into Africa, all of a sudden there is a de-risking strategy. And a lot of people are afraid from foreign regulators who issue very sensitive and very expensive warnings and penalties. And unfortunately, it's not only Africa, it's also the Arab world. There are some countries that are classified as high risk. And again, what you need is people who have worked internationally, who understand international business, and who are not afraid and who don't shy away from problems, because problems are also always an opportunity. But many banks are run nowadays in the Western world by people who really concentrate a lot on compliance, KYC, know your customer, anti-money laundering, and then countries and continents like Africa and also the area of the Middle East find it difficult to stand up to those requirements. And as long as that doesn't change, I think you will always have a very limited number of banks and businesses looking into those continents.
Brings me to my final question. Now, multinationals in general are very much, they act as ambassadors of the nation that they're from. So I believe that the investor interest that you see in London, London is the financial capital, or one of the largest financial capitals of the world. Regarding the 2030 strategy that we've put into place, our government put into place, you were talking about risk appetite. So as an investor, I come to you at the National Bank of Egypt UK Limited and I say, okay, I really want to invest in Egypt and I do have a good risk appetite for this. Is that really the presentation that you show them, tell them this is the direction of Egypt, this is what Egypt's going to be? I mean, do you believe in it? Do you believe that it is really putting us on the right track, whether on the financial markets or the other pillars that are in it? How do you utilize the 2030 strategy to be able to convince investors to come to Egypt?
Actually, last week I had a presentation 1.5 hours with the Bank of England because I wanted to know about our business strategies. I wanted to know where we come from, how we want to go forward, and they wanted to know about Egypt. And a comment I heard from one of the senior regulators after the meeting was that he very much appreciated the openness. And I think that is what we have. When you look at Egypt, on an international scale is rated B-. B- by Moody's or Standard & Poor's or Fitch, all these rating agencies. Egypt is considered a high-risk country. Now, if I would go to the regulator and tell him, Masri al-Dunya, everything is fine, kullu tamam, ma fish mashakil, you lose credibility. So I believe what's good, and the feedback I got was that it was good, to tell them, listen, yes, there are problems. It might not be easy in certain ways, but there are opportunities. And the measures that have been taken have been necessary and correct. We might argue about whether the devaluation came too early, came too late, but when you look at the subsidy system in Egypt and an artificial exchange rate, these things have to be tackled. And with a population of 92 million and a subsidy system, which according to the World Bank, 86% of the needy people do not even receive anything of that, things have to be changed. And I believe that this is the way forward, to tell the people, your counterparts, yes, there are certain issues, but people are tackling it in the right way. And maybe for the first time in a long period of this country, things are being tackled. I mean, for more than 30 years, the subsidy system was not ever touched. And I think these things are very important. We have to have a story to tell. We have to show the people that we are serious and that we understand the risks, but on the other side, try to do the right thing. And even if it comes at some hardship on the short term. And as long as you convey that message, I think the sky is the limit. When I look at Egypt, also I always find that some of the perceptions are wrong. Even when I talk to friends in Europe, and I ask them, will you come to Egypt on vacation? They often tell you, oh no, it's too dangerous. And they sometimes freak out and I say, what do you mean it's too dangerous? There's nothing. And they continue to travel to other countries that have even more problems. And when you follow the news, you see them on a regular basis. So I think a lot of things also have to do with perception. And apart from that, of course, we have to further develop ourselves by cutting red tape and make things also easier for foreign investors, for example. But no, I do believe that we have an upside. And I also believe that people can be convinced to come here, because many of the investors who came in the past, and I'm also talking multinationals, those who came, I think, always made good money, even during the difficult times. The issue of the foreign currency transfer and transfer of dividends and so on I don't want to ridicule it or anything. It is a problem. But again, I believe an upside is there, and I'm sure that we will have the opportunity to get more investors again in the future.
2 yes or no questions in 2 seconds. You are positive?
I'm positive.
Are we moving in the right direction?
Yes, but it will be a bumpy ride on the short term.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your time and this wonderful discussion. I wish I could spend more time with you.
Thank you very
Best
much.
of luck in London, and always to see National Bank of Egypt doing the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Thank you so much. Perfect. Let me please, Yasser, I just want to present you with this, just a very small certificate.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was a very invigorating discussion. To move on to a very, very dear friend, the co-founder and managing director of Qalaa Holdings, one of Egypt's largest private companies, $8 billion under assets. Extremely proud of the performance of this company for the past 10, 15 years under the leadership of Ahmed Hekel and Hisham El-Khazindar and a lot of very talented people. Hisham, Nawarni, it's always a pleasure to have you. Thank you. أخبارك إيه؟ عامل إيه يا حبيبي? You're good? Please. Hisham, thank you for your time. I know you flew in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and again, that's why I really appreciate having people.
I wouldn't miss it.
Thank you, Habibi. And I really appreciate the support and competitiveness that you've been giving us and the belief that you have in what we're doing in terms of enhancing the competitiveness dialogue in Egypt. And as we always say, dialogue is still very important. Dialogue itself is a conclusion. And when you have so many great minds in the room together, I think when we put our hands together, we'll be able to really formulate the policies that will move Egypt forward. But this cannot be done without the private sector.
Absolutely.
Government cannot, they cannot sustain their trajectory and what they have been doing. So hence the responsibility falls on people like us. So Hisham, today we want to run through a couple of questions and your opinions on this. Now, two of the pillars that really we want to focus on is the financial market development. Again, we heard Yasser talk about the banking sector mostly, but I want to go into more details on the financials and the investment banking, the private equity, the sophistication of the stock exchange and the tools since you are a traded company. All of these things, we rank 111, despite the fact that we had a great banking reform program. Our banks have liquidity. I mean, when you see it from one perspective, you'd be surprised why we're ranking on that level. Then comes the macroeconomic environment. Despite all of these changes, yes, they were done post-September 2016 after the report came out. But moving from 116 to 115, but the list of the global competitiveness countries went down from 140 to 138. So we really didn't move forward. It's one step forward, 2 steps back. What, in your opinion, are the bottlenecks and the true hindering concepts? We know we're moving in the right direction, but what is hindering our financial macroeconomic environment in Egypt?
Good morning, everyone. Ashraf, thank you very much for hosting me. It's an honor to be here and and to contribute to the great debates that you're always leading. Before I answer your question, I want to start on a side note. Today is Mother's Day in Egypt, and a week ago was International Women's Day. And even though gender equity is not specifically one of the 12 pillars of the Global Competitiveness Report, I think there is no path to sustainable growth and development and competitiveness without gender equity. And while Egypt ranks there better than many of our neighbors, I think that's a very low base to rank ourselves from. So, given today being Mother's Day, I just wanted to start by stressing how important of a factor for long-term competitiveness and sustainability gender equity is, and to wish our better halves in the room and outside the room happy Mother's Day. Now back to your core question. So I think that when the 2017-2018 Global Competitiveness Report comes out, inshallah, Egypt's ranking will have moved up markedly. Because, as you pointed out, of the significant and meaningful reforms that have been made over the course of the past few months. I think we've all swallowed a set of very bitter pills, bitter medicine that was long overdue, but that was necessary to put the fundamentals of this country back in the right direction. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but going back to your question on the pillar associated with the financial industry and financial sophistication as one of the pillars, I think you're absolutely right. I think theoretically, Egypt is a large country with a large capital market. The EGX is, by emerging and frontier market standards, a relatively large market. Certainly, in the African contexts, outside of Johannesburg, it is the largest market on the continent in terms of volumes traded and depth of the market and number of listed companies. We have a sophisticated banking sector, a well-regulated banking sector. So, why rank so low then? And I think the question, the answer has a couple of components. One is without anything else happening, on the back of the macroeconomic improvements, I think that this ranking will start improving in the coming year, because very often these rankings are not simply an assessment and an objective absolute assessment, but really reflect the context. And we need to recognize that until a few months ago, our stock markets over the course of the past few years had seen declining volumes and declining values, and it had been a very challenging time with very little in terms of M&A transactions, very little in terms of IPOs. That's on the capital market side. There had been little new innovation in terms of products in the markets. And on the banking sector, I think the foreign exchange issues, certainly during the course of the past year, have put a strain not only on the clients of banks, but on the banks themselves. So without anything else happening, I think purely on the back of the set of reforms, devaluation, subsidy removal, and the change outlook for Egypt, and as a result, the capital market picking up, I think that next year, this pillar of the global competitiveness will move up. But that's not enough. And I think where perhaps we've lagged as a country, whereas in the 90s and early 2000s, we made a lot of progress in terms of developing our capital markets. We got our banking sector in shape, and that allowed Egypt to weather, for example, the financial crisis in 2008. But I think where we've lagged since then has been on the innovation side. Okay. So, when you look at what's happening in other markets around us, on the fintech side, on the microfinance side, on the linkages between finance and technology. When you look at a country like Kenya and the advances that they've done in terms of mobile banking, I think that while our rigidity and and level of regulation within our financial services sector, whether it's bank or non-bank, whether it's protected us through the very turbulent years that we've gone through, we might be at the point where there is a rethinking that is needed and a greater level of openness. And I don't want to say deregulation, because deregulation tends to be a bad word, but innovation in terms of regulation and rethinking some regulations to encourage our capital markets to develop further. We've talked for a number of years about the introduction of derivative products, of short trading, of shortening settlement times, and I think now is the time on the capital market side for a push to be made in that direction. And on the banking side, greater openness to the intersection that is taking place globally between technology and banking, and mobile telephony and microfinance, and really pushing the envelope and encouraging both existing players as well as opening the door for new players to innovate and grow Egypt's financial services sector through these innovations, and that will lead to much further improvements on the ranking on the financial, on the financial competitiveness pillar.
Hisham, thank you very much. Allow me to add to that and maybe go off the original questions that we might have talked about earlier. But what you're talking about, in terms, it's a very positive direction. I love to hear that we will be coming down. It's either whether it's going to be an India-style 16 points down, or 1 or 2 as we move along. And I'm very optimistic that, and that's why I'm really happy that India is going to be with us here today to represent what they did to come down on these 16 points. But I sit with a lot of international investors, because we're a think tank, not because they're investing in us. You sit with them for a completely different reason, of course. But a lot of them have an inhibition, are still very prudent about approaching the Egyptian market. And as I was saying before with Yasser, that Egyptian multinationals are ambassadors to the Egyptian economy, and Citadel Capital would be one of the biggest ambassadors of the Egyptian economy. When you sit with these investors on more technical issues and more technical terms, I'm sure they ask you, what is the risk that you are willing to take in Egypt as Qalaa? What are your future plans within expanding within the Egyptian economy, and to show the rest of the international community that there's a belief of Egyptian companies within the economy itself, please?
My views and mood and communication about Egypt and its outlook have improved significantly over the past few months. I think they've evolved from concern to cautious optimism on the back of the reforms that have taken place. Again, I think that notwithstanding the manner in which some of the reforms have been implemented, the speed at which they've been implemented, notwithstanding sometimes perhaps the lack of communication or the inconsistent messages being sent, notwithstanding all of that, I think there's been a fundamental shift over the past few months in Egypt's economic fabric, in Egypt's economic system. The devaluation has a very important role to play there. For the first time in a very long time, and certainly for the first time since the revolution, we've become a country where rather than effectively foreign currency and imports being subsidized implicitly because our currency was inflated, was being protected, for the first time in a long time we have a situation where our currency and as a result our economy is competitive when it comes to manufacturing and exports. Okay? For the first time in a long time, the incentive for an Egyptian investor is not to act as an importer and distributor of foreign goods. The incentive for investors is to manufacture in Egypt for the purpose of import substitution and for the purpose of exports. And I think this is a very fundamental shift in dynamics that's critical to us building an economy that is sustainable. An economy based on manufacturing, import substitution, export orientation, as opposed to, as we've had in parts of the past, an economy that was based primarily on the fact that there's a big consumer market, so let's import lots of stuff, let's do agencies and importation companies and distribute locally without really adding a lot of value locally. Or, as had been the case over a number of years, where you had industry, but industry that benefited primarily from heavy energy subsidies, okay? And arbitraged the fact that it got energy at a subsidized price in Egypt and produced cement or steel or fertilizers at international prices. I think these days are over today, okay? And whoever, and if as investors we want to succeed in this country, we need to focus on those sectors and those areas where there's greater local value adds on industry, essentially. And, and certainly within Qalaa Holdings, that's exactly what we've, first of all, we had bet, I think, on these macro changes for a long time and perhaps suffered because we waited for a long time until they started materializing. But we're seeing some of our businesses, our solid waste management business, which is really about collecting waste and using it as a local source of energy and as an alternative to imported coal or imported gas. We're seeing a business such as Glass Rocks, our insulation material business, which is really about manufacturing insulation materials that are exported using local silica sand, rock wool, basalt rock, and local labor, and producing a product with a very high local value added for export purposes. So we're doing an expansion there. We're doing an expansion in our solid waste business. We're doing an expansion in Dina Farms, and Dina Farms is a business some of you might be familiar with. We're the largest dairy farm in Egypt, and we're increasing the size of the farm because all of a sudden, following the devaluation, the economics of producing milk in Egypt, rather than importing skim milk powder, have been significantly enhanced. So these are the elements, I think, that despite any issues that some of us might have with the pace of reform, with the clarity of some of the messages, I think fundamentally there's been an important shift, and that if the momentum of reform is maintained, and if the momentum of reform is supported by, in addition to fiscal reforms and monetary reforms, a set of reforms linked to ease of doing business in this country, this is what will really put us on the right track for the consistent type of growth that then allows us as Egyptians to have our incomes, after they've been significantly eroded by the devaluation and the inflation of the past period, for our incomes as Egyptians across income segments to start growing again.
Hisham, final question, again off the script, as they say. A lot of countries that are here with us today, Singapore being one of them,
Yes.
that went through a very interesting privatization, or had a series of different privatizations of public sector companies. Now, please allow me to ask you this question regarding public sector companies. We were talking about innovation, efficiency, and all of these economic reforms, deregulation, or if we want, innovation and regulation. And we've seen pre-2010 a privatization program of, people might argue both sides of the coin on this, whether it was successful or if it wasn't. In my opinion, there were a lot of successful cases. I'm sure, in your opinion, the same thing. For us to be able to move forward, do we have to look at public sector reforms again? Should we be looking at initiating a privatization program? How do you see that in the way forward, is my final question to you.
Thank you. This is a loaded question. So a couple of thoughts on it. Like you, I think that the privatization program of the 1990s and the 2000s actually had many successes embedded in it. But I think it highlights exactly one of the challenges that Egypt has had in the past and that we don't want to have in the future, which is sometimes you do the right reforms, you do the right things, but because you're not communicating them properly, because you're not selling them properly, because you don't have enough dialogue around what you're doing, you end up having a backlash and negative perceptions of what was the right thing to do having taken place. And I think this. I hope there's a lesson learned there from the 90s and 2000s that communicating and consistently communicating the rationale and the benefits despite the pain of the reforms taking place right now is extremely important. So that's one point. The second point is philosophically, obviously, I have a bias towards private-led enterprise, okay, and private entrepreneurship as opposed to state-owned entrepreneurship. So, I need to be very clear on that. But having said that, there are, in a number of markets, and Singapore is certainly one, Dubai is another one, examples of very successful state-owned enterprises. So I don't want to be dogmatic about this and say that state-owned enterprises are doomed to fail. And that they ought to be privatized as quickly as possible and that they should not be expanded in the first place. I think that would be too simplistic. But the question that we need to ask ourselves in Egypt, as we go through this phase of the expansion of the public sector, whether it's owned by civilian entities or security or led by the armed forces, at the end of the day, it's state-owned enterprises. The question we need to ask ourselves is, when we look at the success stories of Singapore or the success stories of Dubai, what is it that has allowed these state-owned enterprises to be successful? And I think the answer to that is, it's the same criteria that allows private enterprises to be successful, namely that you get the best management you can get, whether this management is locals or expats that you're bringing, whether your CEO is Egyptian or foreign, but you get the best talent that you can and compensate your talent as much as you can, and ensure that the objective of this enterprise, whether it's state-owned or privately owned, is to grow, is to be profitable, and to generate profits. To, at the same time, be socially responsible, and have and contribute to the community that it operates in. But if your primary purpose in a state-owned enterprise is to simply produce goods at a discount, at subsidized prices, or if your primary purpose is to simply create jobs, regardless of the efficiency and productivity of your workforce, I think this is when you're doomed to fail, sooner or later. And as a result, I really hope, and maybe this is wishful thinking, but I really hope that in this round of expansion of the public sector that is taking place in Egypt, that we do learn from the lessons of Singapore and the lessons of Dubai, and in some cases the lessons of China, of building state-owned enterprises where the state-owned is not the key part. They're enterprises, successful enterprises built on the fundamentals that make any enterprise successful, rather than being, NGOs that disguise for the purpose of employment creation or good subsidies that disguise themselves as enterprises. Thank you.
Hisham, thank you very much for that. My last two questions, yes and no, very briefly. You are positive?
Yes, I am.
Are we moving in the right direction?
We generally are, yes.
Perfect. Hisham, thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's perfect. Thank you. Hisham, if I can please. Hisham, a very small certificate just to thank you for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Habibi. Really appreciate it. If you allow me 1 minute to get the stage prepared.